Okay. Well, thanks, Pete, for the introduction, and thank you all for participating today. As advertised, this webinar is on dealing with do-it-yourself weed and brush control equipment. And so this picture here shows probably one of the first attempts to do weed and brush control as a do-it-yourself. This is out in West Texas, and they've got a boom here that where 6 people could have spray guns and go along and treat brush as the tractor goes across the pasture. So we have this program that developed back in the mid 90s called Brush Busters, and this is what with Brush Busters we have developed do-it-yourself equipment that we use in the program. And Brush Busters program is based on knowing the target plant species that we want to treat and selecting an appropriate treatment for that particular species, using the proper equipment, having the correct herbicide mixes, and then applying those treatments correctly at the proper time. And one of the things that we try to stress with the Brush Busters and Weed Busters approach is avoid single treatment approach. In other words, we can't eradicate brush. We can manage it or control it, but we're not going to be able to eradicate it. So whatever we do is going to require some follow-up treatments. Okay, so currently we have all these Brush Buster species pamphlets that are available. Mesquite, cedar, prickly pear, Chinese tallow, greenbrier, and you can see yucca, salt cedar, Weesach, McCartney rose, and cut stump treatments. And we also have several Weed Buster pamphlets that are available as well. And in each of these pamphlets, we have suggestions for the 2 or 3 best treatment practices for that particular species. It include the method, the particular method, and herbicide mixes if their herbicides are suggested. This slide here shows a couple of those publications, those pamphlets on the sides here of the slide, one from how to beat mesquite and one on cut stumps. And these are available from agrilifebookstore.org. You go into the bookstore and establish an account with a username and a password, and then these publications, the pamphlets, as well as the one in the center, the Chemical Weed and Brush Control Guide, which has all of our chemical weed and control herbicide suggestions, are available for download as in PDF form. So they're free. You can download them to your computer and store them. And the place to get those either through your county extension office, or if you want to go to the agrilifebookstore.org, you can, as I say, download those for free once you establish an account with a username and a password. So what we're going to look at today in this do-it-yourself equipment for brush control as well as weed control, some IPT stem spray equipment, leaf spray. We're going to show you some equipment for soil spot sprays and Whorl sprays, broadcast liquid sprays, and then some equipment for pelleted spray or applications, actually not spray but application, and then of course cut stump. And we've got a couple of organic possibilities for you without use of herbicides. So we'll start off with the stem sprays, and as we go along, if you have a question, you can type it in that chat box, and we've got a couple of breaks in the presentation where we'll look at the chat box and try to answer questions. So first we'll look at the stem spraying equipment for individual plant treatments, and this is what we used to do. This is an oiler, and they would take diesel or kerosene, and they might put some herbicide in. And they would oil the base of the mesquite, for example, when during the summer when it was hot and dry and the soil was pulled away from the plant, and they would oil till it was puddled up. And so we've modernized that, and so that we have a smaller footprint than we used to have with this particular practice. This is one piece of equipment that we can use with stem sprays, but there are some problems with it. It's not practical for most jobs because you have to hand carry it, you have to set it down on the ground and pump it up, and then unless you some of the spray wands aren't adaptable to the kind of nozzles that we recommend. You can get by that by replacing the wand that comes with it with a wand like we're showing here. That's a substitute wand, but it's not a lot of fun to carry it around and keep pumping it up on the ground. So it's not, as I said, not practical for a lot of situations. Typically, we'll use a backpack sprayer like this. There are a lot of models on the market, and so you just choose one that you like to work with. With this in particular picture, we're showing an aftermarket harness here that it costs about $45. It's available from forestry suppliers, and then also Solo has started to make a similar harness that's available. So you can see it's got padded straps here, and then it's got a belt that helps take weight off of your back. And of course we've got the spray wand here that's the backpack's equipped with, and this one has the type of nozzle that we suggest that we're going to show more of here in a minute. One thing I'd like to point out is my personal preference is in these backpack sprayers is a piston pump type mechanism like this one that we're showing here. Some of them come with a diaphragm type that's a little harder to clean out. I've never had trouble with the piston pump, but I will tell you that when we're using stem sprays, we're using a herbicide that's oil-based, and we're using it in diesel carrier. So those the diesel and the herbicide itself are corrosive to O-rings, and so you really have to clean these out if you're going to keep them functioning. So after you do the spray, put some water in there and pump it till the water's clear, and then you can put some liquid detergent or ammonia in and run it through the system and get it nicely cleaned out, so it'll last you a lot longer. Okay, so typically these backpack sprayers come with a fan type nozzle like we're looking at right here, and this slide demonstrates the kind of spray pattern that we get with a fan type nozzle. Now our target is this stem. We got a single stem mesquite here, and what we want to do is we want to spray the lower 12 or so inches of that stem all the way down to the ground line and all the way around. And what's happening here is that we're actually overspraying, and so we're actually losing using too much material. And so there's a solution to that that we'll look at in this. Well, here's this slide shows several different kinds of nozzles that we can use. The flat fan nozzle is good for weed spraying, and then we've got a couple of large orifice nozzles here that are good for leaf spraying, and then the stem spray we're going to use a small orifice nozzle that we'll show you here in a second. So this is what we like to use. It's a cone jet 5500X1, has a very small orifice here. We adjust that to a fine cone, and then behind that nozzle we'll put a 100 mesh screen check valve. And what that screen check valve does is the screen keeps the nozzle from clogging, and the check valve, when you let up on the trigger, it stops the nozzle from dribbling, so it keeps things cleaner. Now, you do have to take that, remove the nozzle periodically and clean that screen. Make sure the screen's clean, because it will get clogged up with some of the dyes and surfactants or whatever that we use in these mixes, and so it can get clogged up. And this is what the spray pattern looks like when we're using that small orifice nozzle. I think you can see here that the stem of this mesquite is, you can see the diesel on it is it's wet there, and we don't see any overspraying like we saw with the flat fan nozzle. And if they don't come with a flat fan nozzle, they also can come with a large orifice nozzle, which is fine for leaf spray, but it still oversprays for a stem spray. Okay, so if we're gonna, when we get plants that are multi-stem, typically it's better to go with a leaf spray than a stem spray, just in terms of economics, and also it's because if you have a multi-stem plant, every stem has to be treated, and it gets more expensive. So we can do a more economical job, and also get better movement into the bud zone with a leaf spray when we have that kind of growth form. So when we go to leaf spray, now we're going to change the nozzle size. We're going to go to an X8 nozzle. You can see here that that's a larger orifice nozzle here. We're going to keep the 100 mesh screen check valve behind that nozzle, because we still have the same kind of issues with clogging the nozzle, or when we let up on the trigger, stops the nozzle from dribbling. So the only change we're making here is really the size of the nozzle opening. Okay, now in this photograph here, we're showing a couple of guys that are doing individual plant treatments on prickly pear, and they're using backpacks, and we can do that, but when we're doing leaf sprays or pad sprays, we're going to use a good bit of a volume compared to what we do with stem sprays. When we do stem sprays, we might only put a gallon of the mix, the herbicide mix, in a backpack sprayer, because it'll probably last you about an hour, and then you can take a break and refill. With pad sprays or leaf sprays, we're going to use a lot more volume because we have a bigger nozzle, and we've got more area to cover. So we typically have to fill that backpack sprayer up with the herbicide mix. So when you do that, you've got a lot of weight on your back, and so the backpacks become a little less practical if you got a lot to spray. So for small jobs, the backpack's okay, still okay, but for bigger jobs, we need to do something that's going to be more efficient and not kill us. So the way that we've approached this, back in the mid-90s when the Brush Buster program was initiated, I don't remember the mules being around much at that time, but we had lots of ATVs around, so we equipped these ATVs to serve as spray rigs. And so what we did was we would put a tank like this on the ATV, mounted on the ATV, with a 12-volt power source, and that tank, we want to limit it to 14 to 25 gallon range, because once we get above 25 gallons, the ATV vehicle stability is compromised. Now, if you were using a mule, obviously you could carry more spray volume. Mules aren't quite as maneuverable and we'll show you here in a minute a setup that we've used with the ATVs, but of course a mule is a possibility. And we don't need a real big pump for these leaf sprays. 1.4 to 1.8 gallons per minute or 2 gallon per minute pump is fine. We'll use typically 3/8 inch hose, poly wands, and then that X8 nozzle, and then the 100 mesh screen check valve behind the nozzle. Some people talk to me about, or mention to me, that they're using diesel in the tanks for stem sprays, and there's a couple of problems with that. A lot of these pumps won't handle diesel. They're not made to handle oils. And the other thing is that it's pretty difficult to spray stem spray from an ATV. You have to really get up close and personal with that stem to do a good job of it. Whereas you can do a good job from the ATV on a leaf spray. So there's just a couple of drawbacks to trying to do stem sprays with an ATV like this. The driver would be difficult for the driver to do any kind of good job on the stem spray. So we've pretty much limited stem sprays to the backpacks, because you do have to get up close and personal with that stem. Okay, so this is a ATV that's been rigged up for a 3-person crew, and what we've got here is the driver has a spray wand here, and then we've got 2 people that are walking, and they have 20-foot hoses coming off the spray tank. So with those 2 people walking and the driver, we can cover a 40-foot swath. And the driver's job is really to get these 2 people that are walking to where they need to be. And so the driver can spray whatever he or she can reach from the vehicle, but I would encourage the driver not to get off, because when that happens, not to get off and spray, because when that happens, the 2 people that are walking, if they're finished spraying as much as they can, they may have to wait for the driver to get back on. But it's a really efficient setup. It doesn't take a lot of plumbing, just some hoses that you can buy at different places like Tractor Supply. And we've got the poly wands, and of course they're equipped with the right kind of nozzle and the 100 mesh screen check valve. So we can really cover a good bit of ground. And one of the things to keep in mind is that the Brush Busters program is meant to once you get the brush to where you are happy with it, or can live with it, or where you want it, it's a way to maintain it at that level. So way for you to do follow-up treatments efficiently. Okay, so we kind of move into the cut stump method, and what we've got here is a piece of mesquite that's been cut off, and you can see underneath the bark we've got this area that I'm pointing to, and that's the cambium layer, and that's where the conductive or the vascular system of the tree is located. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to open up to get access to the vascular system, because this method works really well when we get into rough bark like mesquite like this, or rough bark plants like this, where the stem sprays will have difficulty getting through this rough bark. Stem sprays are best used for smooth bark plants. So once we get to this rough bark, we can get to the cambium layer by doing a cut stump. Another reason for doing cut stump is if you have to have the plants out of the way, if you can't leave them standing. So what we do is we'll mix 15% triclopyr ester in diesel And so that's about 19.5 ounces of that herbicide in diesel. And what you want to make sure is that you're going to mix a gallon of spray mix. So you don't want to have 128 ounces of diesel and then add the herbicide to that. You want to bring your volume up with the herbicide in it to a gallon. So that's our target there, is this cambium layer basically. But we're going to kind of factor in some insurance on hitting the cambium layer. I'll show you here in a minute. So we can use chainsaws to do the cutting. We can also use loppers if the stems are small enough. And I've used this type of device here that we put a saw blade on. We had to do a little bit of engineering to the driver to cut it down where it would accept a saw blade, but it does a good job up to about 2-inch diameter. And since I bought this one several years ago, there are other brands on the market that are available. So this is also an option for actually doing the cutting part of the stump, or that treatment. Reason I'm showing you this spray bottle here is when we put out some experimental plots that we were looking at different treatments, instead of carrying a backpack around, we mixed our herbicide up and put it in one of these spray bottles like this, and it works really well for cut stump. So it's just another option. There's nothing wrong with using the backpack, but you can also use something like this that's maybe a little bit more portable. And I would say that the cut stump is best done when you have two people, a team of two doing it, one person cutting and another person coming behind and doing the spraying. Okay, so this slide right here shows a couple of examples of, on the left here, I would say this is an example of how not to cut the stump, because what they've done here is they left probably 10 or 12 maybe or so inches of stump sticking up here. And in our recommendation, we suggest that you treat the cut surface as well as the bark that's above ground. And the other problem with this is that, to me, it's kind of like an accident waiting to happen. Somebody's going to drive over that or stumble over it or whatever. So what we really suggest is that you cut like this on the right, where you're closer to the ground. You want to cut fairly level. You don't have to take a carpenter's level and do it, but you want to cut fairly level. You don't want to cut at try not to cut at a 45-degree angle, because the herbicide can run off that top part of the cut and you'll get sprouting from that spot. We've seen that happen. Okay, so what we like to do with the cut stump is we want to cut every stem close to the soil surface. We want to avoid leaving soil on that cut stump, because that'll act like a wick and keep the herbicide from contacting the cambium layer. We really strongly suggest that you spray the cut stump immediately after it's cut, after cutting. Two reasons for that. One is you've got a fresh cut and you've got access to that cambium layer when it's moist. If you wait, it'll dry out and it'll be harder to get herbicide in. People tell me they've waited 30 minutes or an hour or 2 weeks or whatever and been successful, but one of the questions I have is, can you find what you cut in 30 minutes? And if you can't find it, then you've really not done yourself a favor, because if you cut it and don't treat it, it's going to resprout on you. So that's why we really suggest cutting it or treating it immediately after it's cutting. That's why it works best if you're working in a team. You adjust that nozzle to a coarse mist. You spray the entire cut surface, especially the outer edges. The outer edges are where the cambium layer is, and theoretically you could just treat the cambium layer, but in terms of efficiency, it's a whole lot more efficient just to treat that whole cut surface and go on. I mean, make sure you got the whole thing treated, and then you spray that bark from the cut to the ground level, get it nice and wet, almost to the point of runoff. And then we like to put a dye in there, like a highlight blue dye, to assure good coverage. That helps us see that. And even though that dye is water-based, it colors the diesel enough that we can see that coverage. And so you know that it's been treated. You're not in doubt. Okay, there's a couple of mistakes that we can make with the cut stump, and this is one of them. So what we like to do is we like to spray every cut stem, and this stem right here that I'm pointing to was missed, wasn't sprayed, and so you can see that it's sprouting back. The other thing that can happen is you want to spray the entire cut surface and the bark from the cut to the ground, and in this case we have a portion of that stem, of that cut stump, that was missed, and so it's sprouting. And the reason it's sprouting back is when you miss that cambium layer, you don't get that portion of the cambium layer, you don't get movement down into the bud zone. There's a bud zone below ground that you're trying to reach and get uniform movement into. And so in this case, there was a portion that was missed. There was a bud that was below that portion of the cambium layer, and it was allowed to sprout because it was missed. So that's the reason for making sure that you get that whole cut surface treated. And it's just, like I said, it's just more efficient, quicker. You just spend less time trying to paint the cambium layer if you just spray the whole thing. And then when you get smaller diameter stems, it's a whole lot easier to make sure that you just treat the whole thing instead of trying just the outer edges. So that's why our recommendation is that. So I'm going to pause right here and see if we have some questions, and I think we do. See, let me go back up in the chat box here. Okay, Bob S. says, where are nozzles available? The best place that I've been able to find nozzles recently has been, there's a company called Wiley Sprayers. You can locate them online, and they're located all over the state, and they have an online catalog, and they also have 800 numbers, so you can call them and tell them what you need, and they can ship it to you. I mean, you can find what you're looking for in the catalog, but sometimes it's easier just to talk to one of their reps and get them to tell them what you need, and they can get you fixed up. Okay. Okay, so let's see if Leslie, or I mean, I'm sorry, Luis has a question. Okay, well, thank you for that comment about these being helpful. Okay. Okay, Kathy says the guys in this picture are not wearing eye protection. You don't, we're going to cover this a little bit later in the presentation, but it doesn't hurt to stop and address it right now. Eye protection is really highly necessary when you're mixing herbicides. And basically, if you check on if you look on the labels, they'll call for long sleeve shirts, chemical resistant gloves, long pants, socks, shoes, and if anything else that you need to add, if you're sensitive to herbicides, you may want to wear a mask. Most of these range herbicides are relatively benign. They have high lethal doses, which means it takes a lot of them to kill a mouse in tests, but that doesn't mean you should take chances with them. So I don't discourage eye protection, but it's really more important. The most importance is when you're mixing the herbicides, but certainly if you feel it necessary, do it. Okay, Evelyn says she agrees with Kathy, need eye protection, and it's great to earn CUs at home. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree at all with the eye protection comment. Are there alternatives to diesel as a carrier? Yeah, there are. The alternatives are some vegetable oils and some basal oils. The problem is the cost. They're going to cost around $10 a gallon, but they're certainly around. They're also going to be maybe a little bit harder to find because typically they're used more in the vegetation management market. Uh, but they are there are other alternatives. And then let's see, Cindy wants to know, when is the best time to do cut stump method? You can do the cut stump method any time of the year, and my preference is to do it this time of year. I mean, of course, it should be cooler this time of year than it is this year, but you know, when cooler temperatures, it's easier on the people that are doing the work because it is labor intensive. So you can do it anytime. Okay, and then Cindy says, what's the formula for spraying cactus? Okay, typically what we suggest is 1% 1% surmount as a pad spray. You can also use 1% Pasture Guard HL as a pad spray. 1% by volume. So in other words, you'd a gallon in 100 gallons of mix. You'd also would add a 1/4% of surfactant, which would be a quart of surfactant per 100 gallons, and we would also add a quart of dye per 100 gallons. That would be the rate. Okay, so Juan says, after the spray methods have been applied, how will one know the application has worked? Do leaves begin to fall off? When can the remainder of the brush be removed? Okay, so you'll know that if you're doing a stem spray, for example, and you're doing it during the growing season, you'll see the leaves turn brown. And as far as removing the plant, you want to wait till the plant is dead, till you can actually walk up to it and push it over with your foot easily where it snaps off. If you have to have it out of the way sooner than that, I mean, and this may take a year or more for that to deteriorate. But if you need it gone before that, you might want to consider the cut stump method because that's immediate removal. Oh, okay. Okay, so Pete says, Kathy asked this question. Kathy, should you be spraying those surface roots as well? No, you don't have to spray the surface roots. You just need to spray the cut surface. I assume we're talking about the cut stump method. And if we're talking about prickly pear, all we need to be worried about really is are the pads themselves. You want to spray both sides of each pad. Try to do that. And then if you can see the crown of the plant, you want to spray that, but don't worry about the roots. If we're talking about cactus. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to move on, and if if I didn't clarify some of those questions, there's another break at the end where I'll address questions again. Okay, so equipment for soil spot and Whorl sprays. In this picture, we've got a herbicide here called Velpar. It's a soil applied herbicide, and I'm going to show you some issues with that herbicide. And then we've got a method where we can use Remedy or triclopyr esters for Whorl spray on yucca. So, all right. So if we're gonna use a spot gun, the cost of those varies anywhere from $12 to $80. Down here in the left-hand corner, we've got, this is a sheep drench gun that can be adjusted to the volume that you want to spray or apply. And Velpar is typically, it's applied undiluted to the ground, and the ones that are about $12, they're kind of disposable because Velpar is really rough on plastics. If you have a sheep drench gun and you've got $80 invested in it, you want to clean it out after it's been sprayed. Take it, run water through it and then put some mineral oil through it so you can keep it functioning. So in this next slide here, in the top left here, we're showing a sheep drench bladder. This is where they put the drench material when they're drenching sheep, but it's really convenient for using for applying Velpar as a spot spray. You can also attach, if you got the right kind of equipment, you can pull it right out of the container. And then the other thing with Velpar that you want, if you do use Velpar, you might want to put some dye in it so you can see that you actually treated the soil, treated the spot. So I'm going to show you why you might not want to use Velpar, and this is why. In this photograph on the left-hand corner here, we've got a cedar that was treated with Velpar, and then we've got in this other circle, that larger green circle, we're showing beginning of herbicide damage to that oak tree. So what's happened is this juniper was treated too close to the oak tree, and the oak tree has roots that come out at least 3 times the canopy diameter away from the tree. So if the tree has a 50-foot diameter, that means roots can go out as far as 100 feeder roots can go out as far as 150 feet possibly. So you need to stay that far away from a desirable tree, and so that's one reason that you might not want to use that particular approach. Because, for example, for cedar, we can, if it's ash juniper, blueberry cedar, we can cut it off, leave no green, and we don't. It's not going to grow back. Now, if it's redberry cedar out west, it's a different story. We do have to either grub it out of the ground, or we have to do a leaf spray, or we can do a cut stump type spray. No, we don't do a cut stump spray on that with the Remedy and Diesel or the Triclopyr. We use Tordon and water if it's the redberry. Okay, so that's one issue with these soil applied herbicides. They're non-selective, and the Velpar can be picked up away from a desirable plant, and it can also move down slope. All right, so move on to the yucca, and we've got an approach for treating the yucca as an individual plant. And what we do is we'll mix Triclopyr in oil, and down here in the lower right hand corner, we're suggesting using 15% Triclopyr, which comes either in Remedy Ultra or in Clear Pasture, and there are other generics around now. Triclopyr 4E, 4EC, those are generics of the Triclopyr. So 15% Triclopyr, 85% diesel, which would be the same mix that we use for cut stump. So basically about 20 ounces of the Triclopyr to a gallon of spray. 20 ounces of Triclopyr, 108 ounces of diesel, or if you're going to use one of the oils, other oils, that would be the volume. And what we do is we'll use a small orifice nozzle like we did before. We got the backpack sprayer here. The backpack's going to work much better than that spray bottle on this, because you do need to spray for a 2-second shot into the whorl. So you basically count Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, or 1001, 1002 into each whorl, and it's very effective. You need to do that during the growing season, like around May or so. Wintertime's not a good time to do this practice. Okay, so we're also going to include the dye in that spray so that we know that we've treated the whorls. It helps to mark those whorls. And even though we're still dealing with a diesel mix or an oil mix, the dye is going to, and this is a water-based dye, will still cover that or color it well enough we can tell what we're doing. Okay, so we'll move on to pelleted herbicides. There's only really one out there called Spike 20P. And what you see here is a container that has a measuring device on top that allows you to dispense a known volume of the spike pellets, and in this case, this fella is applying the pellets by hand to some brush here in the photograph. There are other ways to apply spike on a broadcast application. It's from a ground perspective, it's hard to calibrate. So that's one of the issues with doing broadcasts with the pellets from a ground perspective and do-it-yourself perspective. A lot of times, what it's applied from the air, where they can calibrate. These devices here, these blowguns, they're hard to calibrate. But that is one issue with that particular treatment. And another issue is that spike is a soil applied herbicide. It's non-selective, and here we see spike applied too close to an oak tree. So in a lot of cases in the state, this is probably a herbicide you want to stay away from. It has its place, but you do need to be aware that there are some collateral. There can be some collateral damage. Okay. All right. So we'll move on to equipment for broadcast spraying liquid herbicides. This would apply to weeds in particular, and then also ground applications for brush control. One of the things that we need, or two things we need really, we need a pressure gauge so that we can tell we're operating in the right at the right pressure for to get the right kind of droplets out, and we need a cutoff valve here, a bypass valve, so that we can cut, so that we excuse me, can stop the spray, control spray going through the boom. We also need an accurate speedometer, especially if you're excuse me, especially if you're using an ATV or a mule. The only way you have to control your output basically is with speed. You have to figure out how fast or how slow you're going to go for the amount of spray volume you want to put out per acre. So you do need that. And one of the things I for this presentation I put in for the first time is this slide about a guidance system. And the reason I thought about this, I actually used this Monday in putting out some treatment, some plot work that we're doing. And so this is kind of a low-end guidance system. It cost about $800 or $900. It's S-Lite Outback. So what you do is there's a menu here where you set your swath width, and you also set the sensitivity of the light bar. And then when you get ready to make your first pass across the treated area, you indicate whether it's going to be straight line guidance or if it's going to be contour guidance. And let's just say, for example, it's straight line guidance. You enter that, and then it's going to ask you, it's going to say enter, and you enter, that's your first point, and then you drive a straight line, and when you get to the end of that straight line that you want to establish, you hit enter again, and that establishes what's called an AB line. That's your first pass. That's your zero pass. And then when you turn to go to your next pass, this light bar here is going to indicate where you need to be. And what you want is you want all the lights lined up in the middle, or as close to the middle as you can keep them. And then what's going to happen is if you get off course, you're going to see a light up to the left or light to the right, and you need to steer back to where you try to keep it on course. One of the things that I would tell you is, as far as sensitivity, when I first started using this, I made the mistake of setting it at a high sensitivity, and every bump you hit, you're off course. So I reset the sensitivity at low, and now it's it's not a problem to keep it on course. And what you need to do is when you make that turn, your first turn after you establish your AB line, a number will show up on the screen, and it's going to show you a positive or negative 1 depending on which direction you turned, and you line up. That tells you that you're on the next pass, on pass 1 after 0, and then you line up with your light bar in the middle. And after you go to do pass 1, you'll make another turn, and the number 2 will show up in the screen, and again you line up with the light bar and keep the light bar in the middle, and it'll keep you on course. And so using this kind of system can help you avoid skips. I mean, typically when I'm doing this kind of plot work, we're doing with boomless nozzles, and we're allowing some overlap, and so I've been really fortunate using the system that we're not getting skips. So it's just another thing for you to think about. There are higher cost guidance systems that do more, that show a path on the screen and things like that. This is one that I can use on an ATV pretty easily. So that's the reason that I went with this model. Plus it's less expensive than some of the others. Okay, so one of the pieces of equipment that we can use for ground broadcast is a boom like this, a boom sprayer. And they're fine for weeds, but the problem is if the brush is above this boom here, if we're spraying brush and it's above this boom, then the brush is going to interfere with your spray, getting your good spray pattern, unless you can get the boom up above the brush, which is another option. Okay, so but we can go to what we call boomless nozzles, and this is a field jet. I think it costs about $30. It puts out about a 15-foot swath. So it's a low entry type of device that could be used. One thing you want to realize is you want your spray to be about 18 to 24 inches above the brush. So you have to have some kind of mechanism to raise it up there if that's the case. This is a boom jet nozzle. It costs about $150. It puts out a wider swath, and it will put out small droplets because of the nozzles that are installed on it. You do have to have about a 4 gallon per minute pump to operate this, so you have to increase your pump size because of this particular boomless nozzle. And one thing to be aware of is this one does create some small droplets, and so it is real sensitive to wind, to drift. This is another type of nozzle called the Boom Buster. We've actually got 2 installed here, one on either side, so we got it spraying out 2 directions. With this particular setup, I can get about a 28-foot effective swath width. And as I said, with that guidance system and that swath width, been able to avoid skips. It produces a little larger droplet size than the one we just showed you. But it's a good system. Again, it's not cheap. These are stainless steel, and they cost about $100, $125 or so per nozzle. There may be some less expensive ones around that you can find, but it's a decent system for where we need to use a boomless nozzle. Okay, so one of the really important things about broadcast spraying, or 3 things really, is we want to operate in a range of about 20 to 30 pounds per square inch. That's the reason you want that pressure gauge on there. We want to put out about 10 to 30 gallons of spray volume per acre, and we want to calibrate. and calibrates in all caps here, so you can see that that's really, really important. And I'm going to show you why that's important here. So let's just take, for example, we have a recommended herbicide rate of 1 quart per acre. Okay, so if our spray system puts out 10 gallons to the acre, and we want 1 quart to the acre, that means if we mix 100 gallons, we need 10 quarts. 1 quart per 10 gallons. If our system puts out 30 gallons to the acre, and we're going to put out 1 quart to the acre, we need 3 1/3 quarts in that 100 gallons of mix. So big difference in the amount of material that we put out, or herbicide that we put in the mix. That's one of the reasons that it's really important to calibrate. So this next slide illustrates why what the consequences are of under and overestimating spray volume. So for example, if we think our system puts out 10 gallons and we mix accordingly, we put 10 quarts in 100 gallons of mix, but our system actually puts out 30 gallons per acre, then instead of applying 1 quart per acre, we're now applying 3 quarts per acre. So we're applying 3 times as much as we need. And the problem with overestimating spray volume is if we think we're putting out 30 and we mix accordingly, but we're only putting out 10, now we're not putting out nearly enough herbicide. We're only putting out a quarter of a quart per acre. So that's why calibration is really important, so that we get the right amount of herbicide out there. We don't get too much and we don't get too little. All right, so sometimes I get the question, sometimes can we use mist blowers to apply herbicides? Well, some labels actually prohibit the use of mist blowers. These mist blowers are typically used for pecan orchard management, and they're really good for that. They produce a really small, fine droplet size to get good coverage on the pecan leaves for nitrogen and zinc application. But those really, really small droplets create herbicide drift problems. So not a good choice for us with herbicides. We want accurate measuring devices, something that has a scale on it. These plastic ones are good. You can also use Pyrex, but if you use Pyrex, dedicate that to herbicide. Don't take it back in the house. You want to wear, especially when you're mixing, you want to have rubber gloves, and you want to have some kind of eye protection. And as was questioned earlier, should you have eye protection when you're spraying? It sure doesn't hurt. But when you are mixing, that's when you're most susceptible to concentrated herbicide potential splashing up in your eye, that kind of thing. For big jobs, you may want to have a nurse tank, but I would not mix put a whole lot of mixed herbicide, much more than I need to use up quickly. That herbicide in water may only be effective for about a week, so it's best not to mix up a whole lot more than you need. We have some organic methods. Obviously, the grubbing hoe still works on juniper. It'll work on prickly pear. Long handle shovel can work on prickly pear. This is a product. This was invented by this fellow that used to work for Experiment Station at Angelo. He calls it a vendetta. He cut off about a 5-inch width and sharpened this sharpshooter and replaced the handle with an 1.25 inch steel pipe, and he uses it to grub small mesquite. So he's getting below the soil surface, getting below where the bud zone is, and controlling these small mesquites. And this is an organic method, no herbicides, no mixing, instant gratification. He says it's good exercise. So I'm going to stop again and for questions here. Okay, are there? I think I answered the question. Are there alternatives to diesel? Yes, there are. Oils, crop oil. I mean, not crop oils, but basal oils, vegetable oils. Okay, I answered the question about cactus. Okay. Okay. Why do so many different chemicals need to be used? I guess there is no universal chemical. Okay, that's correct. They're different chemicals because they are specific to the species, and I mean they're the most effective on that species. So what we're trying to do with the Brush Busters program is target species and have the most effective herbicide for that species. Uh, is spike okay? How much dye is more or less? A 1/4% dye. So in 100 gallons of mix, you'd have a quart of dye. Okay, is spike restricted? No, spike is not restricted. If mesquite has already been cut off 12 to 18 inches above the soil and not sprayed immediately, what should one do to kill the mesquite trees? If it's single stem, you might go in and just cut it off close to ground level and do a cut stump. If I'm understanding the question correctly. Otherwise, if it's not single stem, I mean, if it was a cut stump where they left 12 or 18 inches, you could go down below that and probably get fresh tissue. So I'm assuming that I'm answering that correctly. Okay, bought a gallon of Splendor brand dye, and I don't remember price exactly, but it was that cheap. But was it worth it because you can see exactly where you sprayed? Well, we don't, I mean, for individual plant treatments, for leaf sprays, we definitely use the dye. For stem spray, we don't use, but for cut stump, we do. So for individual plant treatments, we use the dye so we don't retreat something. So we know what we've treated and don't retreat it. And also it helps us see the coverage. So that's the reason for the dye. Now, typically for broadcast, we're not using dye. I haven't seen a dye that really worked real well. There are some markers, foam markers that work, but I haven't seen a dye that works really that well for broadcast spraying, if that's the question. Oh, okay. So she meant dye wasn't cheap, was worth it. Yeah, no, it's not cheap, but it is worth it. Yeah. What's the best way to calibrate a 50-gallon boom sprayer? Okay, it depends on if it's on a tractor or not. If it's on a tractor, you need to measure the distance between the nozzles, and there's actually some information, spray calibration guide. If you'll put your email in there, we can send you that calibration guide. But basically, if it's 20 inches between nozzles, that means your calibration course has to be 204 feet. You drive that you put water in the tank. You drive at the speed that you think you want to drive at, and time yourself, and then come back and catch the output from a nozzle for say it took you 10 seconds to drive, so you catch it for 10 seconds out of the nozzle, and that's how many gallons you're putting out. What you also need to do is make sure each of the nozzles is within 10% of each other in output. So that's basically how you calibrate. So the course depends on the distance between your nozzles. So what's the best chemical to use on Weesatch, and is it mixed with diesel too? Okay, on Weesatch, the best chemical depends on whether we're going to do leaf spray or stem spray. If we're going to do stem spray, then it would be Remedy Ultra or a Triclopyr ester generic in diesel as a stem spray or a cut stump, just like on mesquite. If it's leaf spray, You can use Grazon P plus D at 1%. We're getting kind of late in the year. Maybe this year it'd still work. You also have the option of using Sendero at 1% as a leaf spray. And with the leaf sprays, you're going to put a 1/4% dye, 1/4% surfactant in there as well. Okay. Regarding the dye, the question I meant to ask was about the cost of the dye. Okay, probably the dye costs somewhere around $40 a gallon. That's a ballpark number, but it is worth it because you don't retreat and you see your spray coverage on individual plant treatments. Okay, a little bit about spraying greenbrier. The best treatment that we have for greenbrier is a stem spray with 25% triclopyr ester and diesel. You can use it any time of year, but that's the best that we have right now, and that's not ideal, but it's the best. I mean, it does give very good kill, but if you've got a real thick greenbrier patch, it may take some whittling down. What about the Chinaberry trees and goatweed? Okay, Chinaberry trees, I would say stem spray with the triclopyr ester and diesel, or cut stump would work on those. And goatweed, you could use herbicides like 2,4-D. That guide that I showed you at the beginning, the weed and brush control suggestions, in there they would have, we've got exactly what you'd want to use for goatweed. It's croton is what it is, or doveweed. As I think that's what you're talking about. The problem with common names sometimes is there's so many of them. Do you have to spray all the greenbrier or just the bottom 12 inches? Just the bottom 12 inches of the stem. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions. Unless, okay, you're recommend something for bull nettle. Okay, bull nettle, and we can include silverleaf nightshade and Carolina and western nettles in there. You want to spray them when they begin to bloom, and you can either do a spot spray with something like Grazon P plus D. You can use or Weedmaster. You want to use something that's tougher than 2,4-D, but you want to spray when they begin to bloom in the spring. So that's our best suggestion on those. And as I said, I would use something like Grazon P plus D or Weedmaster, not just 2,4-D. Okay, thank you all.
Doc, I guess as we wait for more questions to come in, let me go ahead and say that if y'all don't mind clicking on this link here, it's a survey. Fill out the survey. I'm also going to try to pop it out. Y'all keep go ahead and keep asking questions. The other thing I was going to say is if let me go over one more. If you're following us on Facebook, this facebook.com/txrange. I know Dr. Lyons made some comments about sun spray. If you scroll down through that page, you'll see a video on cut stump that Dr. Clayton did that's really, really good. If you can hear me, if by some chance that the web link covered up your screen, if you look down at the bottom of the taskbar, you see like a little four-leaf clover type looking icon. If you click on it, it'll bring the Adobe Connect back to the front. Again, our next session is going to be December the 1st, prescribed burning resources. Dr. Morgan Russell is going to be a speaker. And again, if you're not following us, follow us on facebook.com/txrange. We have educational page there. And if you're not on our mailing list, if you go back to the Natural Resource Webinar website, there's a place there where you can enter your name on the mailing list. And you get notified for all the upcoming webinars and things that are coming up.
Yeah, and whoever was asking about the calibration, if you'll just type a message in there that you need that and give us your email, we can get that sent out to you.
Yes, do that. And again, one more time for those who might have missed it, if you're here for CU credit, please enter your email address into the chat box. And if you're a county agent, please do the same.
Okay, one comment here is says please remind everyone that much wildlife relies on brush, weeds, etc., especially quail. So don't kill everything. Yeah, I agree with you. But you know, the thing is with the brush busters method, we can be selective. We can take out what we want to take out and leave what we don't want to take out. So that's one of the advantages of individual plant treatments. We can uh, be more. We can sculpt. But you're exactly right. In fact, relative to greenbrier, greenbrier is a good deer food. If you don't know that. Okay, Mark Bateman's asking how can you get slides? You can watch this. I mean, this will be recorded and it'll be online. You can watch it again.
Yes, sir.
Right, Pete?
And let me get the website up there right quick where it'll be located. Because we have some others on there, and actually one of the webinars that somebody did, they actually did talked about the calibration also and showed pictures and all the good stuff how to calibrate. But I can't remember top of my head which one it is.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I
I
can't
can't
remember
remember
either.
either, but I remember the width and the 200 feet and all that, and the spraying and how you capture the 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 chemical and how you measure that and all that. But I mean, I've been doing this for 3 years now, and I remember doing it, but I don't remember exactly which one of the webinars it is. But
Yeah.
I guess y'all keep on typing your questions. Thank you all for attending today. Dr. Lyons, awesome job. Thank you for being our awesome speaker today. And again, if you're not following us, you can follow us on www.facebook.com/txrange. That's where our educational page is held.
Okay. I think we're done with questions.